59 years ago, the United States naval intelligence ship USS Liberty was attacked in broad daylight in international waters, flying a large American flag, while her hull number was clearly visible on both bow and stern. Israeli Mirage jets came in first, strafing with 30mm cannons, firing rockets, dropping napalm on the bridge. They jammed the Liberty's distress frequencies, so she could not call for help. When she did manage to get a signal out anyways, rescue aircraft were launched from two nearby American carriers. They were recalled to their ships by order of the Secretary of Defense before they reached the Liberty. The jets were followed by torpedo boats. One torpedo tore a 40-foot hole in the hull, killing 25 men instantly. The torpedo boats then machine gunned the life rafts the crew had put in the water. The attack lasted more than 2 hours. Over 821 cannon, rockets, and machine gun holes were counted in the hull afterwards. 34 Americans were killed. 171 were wounded. More than 2/3 of the entire crew. Israel said it was a mistake, a tragic case of mistaken identity. The official American investigation completed in 1 week, interviewing only 14 of the 294 survivors, and ordered to reach a predetermined conclusion, agreed. The chief counsel of that investigation says he was ordered to lie. This is the story of the USS Liberty, what happened on June 8, 1967, what the survivors have been saying for nearly 6 decades, and why, as of this recording, Congress has still never held a single public hearing on the attack. The Six-Day War began on June 5, 1967, when Israel launched a preemptive strike against the Egyptian Air Force, destroying most of it on the ground in the first hours of the war. Within 4 days, Israel had seized the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, the West Bank from Jordan, and was preparing to take the Syrian Golan Heights, a move that would prove deeply controversial, as both the United States and the Soviet Union had significant interest in preventing the conflict from expanding further. The United States was officially neutral. It had resisted Israel's request for direct military support, and was walking a diplomatic tightrope between its relationship with Israel and its relationship with the Arab world. The Soviets were backing Egypt and Syria. The last thing Washington wanted was for the conflict to draw in the superpowers. Into this environment, the USS Liberty had been deployed. The Liberty was a signals intelligence ship, what the Navy officially called a technical research vessel. Her actual function was to intercept communications. She was, in the language of the intelligence community, a floating listening post. And she had been positioned off the Sinai coast specifically to monitor the conflict. On the morning of June 8, Israeli reconnaissance aircraft flew over the Liberty multiple times. The ship was flying the American flag. Her hull designation, GTR-5, was clearly painted on the bow and stern. By multiple accounts, Israeli aircraft had identified her as an American during the morning reconnaissance passes. At 2 in the afternoon, the attack began. The first aircraft came in fast and low, Israeli Mirage 3 jets, strafing with 30mm cannons. Within minutes, the Liberty's 4 50-caliber machine guns, her only armament, were destroyed. Her communication antennas were shot away. Her crew scrambled to damage control stations and tried to fight the fires that were breaking out across the deck. The jets jammed the Liberty's radio frequencies. Her operators found every channel blocked. She could not call for help, and she couldn't reach anyone. Technicians fought to find a clear frequency, eventually managing to get a partial distress signal out on a different band. It would reach the carrier, USS Saratoga. A second wave of Israeli aircraft arrived, Super Myster fighter bombers, dropping napalm on the bridge and continuing the cannon assault. By the time the air attack ended, the Liberty had been struck by rockets and cannon fire hundreds of times. She was burning. Men were dying and dead across her decks. Then came the torpedo boats. 3 Israeli motor torpedo boats arrived from the direction of Ashdod. Before they closed the attack range, the Liberty's commanding officer, Captain William McGonnell, ordered the largest flag aboard the ship to be raised. A holiday-sized American flag, 7 feet by 13 feet, replacing the one shot away earlier. It was flying clearly when the torpedo boats attacked. They fired 5 torpedoes. One struck amidships, directly in the Liberty's cryptologic spaces, where her intelligence operators worked. The explosion tore a 40-foot hole in the hull. 25 men were killed instantly. 5 more were trapped in the flooding compartment. The Liberty did not sink. She should have. She stayed afloat by the actions of her crew. Men working damage control in flooding compartments. Men keeping pumps running. Men keeping the ship alive through 2 hours of sustained attack. The torpedo boats then turned their attention to the life rafts the crew had put in the water to prepare for possible abandonment. According to survivors' testimony, in the findings of the 2004 Independent Commission chaired by Admiral Thomas Moore, the Israeli torpedo boats machine-gunned those life rafts in the water. If that is accurate, and it is disputed by the Israeli government and by some analysts of the original court testimony, it means the attacking forces were attempting to ensure there were no survivors to report what happened. By the time the attack ended, the USS Liberty had absorbed over 821 cannon and rockets and machine gun hits. 34 Americans were dead. 171 were wounded. More than 70% of the crew were casualties. When the Liberty's partial distress signal reached the Sixth Fleet, the response was immediate. Aircraft were armed and launched from the carrier USS America and USS Saratoga. Fighter jets headed toward the Liberty, towards American sailors under fire in international waters. Minutes after they had launched, they were recalled. The order came from Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, reportedly with the direct approval of President Lyndon Johnson. The jets turned around. They returned to their carriers. The Liberty sat in the Mediterranean for 17 hours without rescue, her dead still aboard, her wounded being treated by her own crew. Admiral Thomas Moore, who would later serve as Chief of the Naval Operations and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest military position in the United States, called the recall of those aircrafts the most disgraceful act I witnessed in my entire military career. The reason for the recall has never been definitively explained in public documents. The most commonly offered explanation is that McNamara and Johnson did not want to risk escalation, did not want American aircraft engaging Israeli forces and potentially drawing the US into direct conflict. The Six-Day War was already threatening to draw in the Soviet Union. The diplomatic calculus of the moment was fragile. What the explanation does not address is why, if the identity of the attackers was unclear, as the US government's position would later claim, aircraft were recalled rather than dispatched to investigate and protect an American ship under fire. Nor does it explain what happened to the investigation that followed. A naval court of inquiry was convened within days of the attack. Admiral Isaac Kidd presided. Captain Ward Boston served as chief legal counsel, the senior attorney responsible for ensuring the investigation was conducted properly and its findings accurately recorded. Boston and Kidd estimated the investigation would take 6 months. They were told orally by the Johnson administration to complete it in 1 week. They interviewed 14 of the Liberty's 294 survivors. They could not interview 60 of the hospitalized wounded. They were barred from traveling to Israel to interview the attacking forces, collect Israel war logs, or review Israeli communications from the day of the attack. The investigation that was eventually conducted into North Korea's capture of the USS Pueblo, a different intelligence ship incident from the same era, lasted nearly 4 months, interviewed over 100 witnesses, and produced a transcript of nearly 3,400 pages. The Liberty Inquiry produced 158 pages. The court's findings were predetermined, according to its own chief counsel. In 2002, Ward Boston broke his silence. In a sworn affidavit released at a Capitol Hill press conference, he stated that President Johnson and Secretary of Defense McNamara had ordered Admiral Kidd to conclude that the attack was a case of mistaken identity, and that this conclusion had been reached despite, in his words, overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Boston said he had stayed silent for 35 years because he was a military man, and when orders came from the President and Secretary of Defense, he followed them. He also stated that the transcript released to the public was not the same document he had certified and sent to Washington, that pages bearing his hand corrections and initials were missing, that the testimony of Lieutenant Lloyd Painter regarding the machine gunning of the life rafts had been removed, and that the released version contained deliberately blank pages the original had not. Boston's account has been disputed. The author of a pro-Israel account of the incident argued that Boston was mistaken about what the evidence showed, and that the mistaken identity conclusion was genuinely supported by the available facts. Boston maintained his account until his death. The original transcript, the one he says he certified, has never been produced. What is documented and not disputed is this: investigators were barred from interviewing the attacking forces. The inquiry took 1 week. 60 wounded sailors were never questioned. The conclusion was delivered before any serious investigation had been conducted. The mistaken identity conclusion was not accepted by everyone in a position to know. Secretary of State Dean Rusk, the man responsible for American diplomacy at the time of the attack, stated publicly he did not believe the attack was a mistake. He said the Liberty had been flying her flag, that she had been overflown by Israeli reconnaissance aircraft that morning, and that there was no satisfactory explanation for how she could have been confused for an Egyptian vessel. CIA Director Richard Helms, when asked his view of the attack, expressed skepticism that it had been an accident. He noted that the Liberty was clearly marked American vessel, and that Israeli intelligence services were among the most capable in the world. NSA Director Bobby Ray Eamon, who ran the agency that had operated control of the Liberty's mission, stated that he did not believe it was a case of mistaken identity. And Admiral Thomas Moore, who, as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was the senior military official in the United States, went further than any of them. Moore chaired an independent commission of inquiry in 2003 and 2004. The commission, whose findings were submitted to Congress and entered into congressional record in October 2004. Its conclusion was unambiguous. The attack had been deliberate, the cover-up was real, and the survivors deserved a proper congressional investigation. Moore wrote in 2004, "I have never believed that the attack on the Liberty was a case of mistaken identity. What is so damnable is that the American government put the protection of its relationship with Israel above the lives of 34 American sailors." The survivors of the Liberty had been making the same argument for 59 years. They were ordered not to speak about the attack, told they would face court-martial if they discussed it publicly, instructed that the matter was classified. Many stayed silent for years out of military discipline. As the decades passed and they aged, they began to talk. June 8th, 2026, the 59th anniversary of the attack. A United States congressman gave a rare floor speech on the House of Representatives demanding a formal congressional investigation into the USS Liberty. He cited the testimony of survivors, the sworn affidavit of the court's own chief counsel, and the conclusion of 4 former senior American officials: the Secretary of State, the CIA director, the NSA director, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, all of whom expressed doubts about the mistaken identity conclusion. He noted that the survivors are aging, that the men who can testify from direct experience are running out of time, that the attack on the USS Liberty is the only major attack on a United States naval vessel that has never received a formal congressional investigation, and that the men who survived it were threatened with court-martial for speaking out about what happened. The official position of the United States government remains: the attack on the USS Liberty was a tragic accident, a case of mistaken identity, and the matter was properly investigated and closed in 1967. The official position of the Israeli government is the same. The survivors of the USS Liberty do not agree. The chief counsel of the Navy's own court of inquiry did not agree. The Secretary of State at the time did not agree. The CIA director did not agree. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs did not agree. And the NSA, 50 years after the attack, was still keeping details of the incident classified. What happened on June 8, 1967, whether the attack was deliberate, whether the Israeli forces knew they were striking an American ship, and why the United States government responded as it did, has never been determined by a formal, independent, public investigation with subpoena power and sworn testimony. 34 American sailors were killed. 171 were wounded. Their ship was in international waters, flying the American flag, in broad daylight. The men who survived were told not to talk. Most of them are gone now. The ones still alive are in their 80s. They are still asking for the truth.